The hum of the fluorescent lights was a low, constant thrumming in my skull, a sound I hadn't consciously registered in years, not until it was the only sound filling the sudden, suffocating silence. My boss, Mark, stood across the polished conference table, his face a mask I'd never seen before, hard, set, entirely devoid of the easy camaraderie he usually wore like a second skin. Around the table, the faces of my colleagues were frozen, like a photograph had snapped mid-motion. Their eyes, usually darting between screens or fixed on presentations, were locked on me.
Pity? Shock? Schade.
I couldn't read them, not through the haze that had descended the moment the words left his mouth. Effective immediately, he'd finished, letting the sentence hang in the air like a guillotine blade. Effective immediately. Fired.
Me.
Here. In front of everyone. The stale coffee smell, usually comforting, now felt like something thick and unpleasant coating my tongue. My hands, which had been resting on the cool laminate of the table, felt heavy, alien. There was a strange ringing in my ears, competing with the relentless hum of the lights. I wanted to speak, to ask, to scream, but the words snagged somewhere in my throat, caught behind a lump that felt like stone. My chest was tight, a vice squeezing the air from my lungs. This couldn't be real. Not like this. Not after everything. Not here. If you're watching this, maybe you've felt that moment, when the world tilts and the ground disappears beneath your feet. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. And if you haven't already, please subscribe, it helps me more than you know. Just hours ago, this had been my life. My office. This building. I knew the security guards by name, the exact pressure needed to open the sometimes sticky back door, the best spot on the 10th floor for a quiet moment with a view of the city sprawling below. For 5 years, I'd poured myself into this job, into this team. Late nights, early mornings, canceled weekends. I'd done it all, believing in the work, believing in the trajectory, believing I was building something solid. My role wasn't just a title. It felt like a piece of my identity, earned through sweat and sacrifice. I'd come here after a rough patch, needing stability, needing a win. This company, this team had felt like home. I'd thrived, exceeding expectations, hitting targets, even pulling off projects that others thought were impossible. Mark himself had praised me, called me his linchpin, the one he could always count on. We'd shared jokes, frustrations, late-night pizza fueled by deadlines. I thought we had a connection, a mutual respect. My desires were simple: security, growth, the satisfaction of doing good work, and the hope that this path would lead to something even bigger, something I could be truly proud of. I wasn't dreaming of yachts or private jets, just a stable future, a comfortable life built on my own merit. The disruption had started subtly. A project I was leading, one I'd poured months into, began to stall. Information I needed was delayed. Meetings I was supposed to be in were rescheduled without my knowledge. Mark became distant. Less available, more formal. His usual easy smile was replaced by a tight line, his eyes shifting away when I tried to talk about the project's hiccups. He started asking me for unusually detailed reports, microscopic breakdowns of my time, things he'd never bothered with before, not with me. It felt like he was building a case, brick by painstaking brick. I dismissed it at first. Stress, I told myself. Maybe he was under pressure from above. We all had those days. But the feeling gnawed at me, a tiny, persistent itch under the skin. Then came the meeting requests. Vague invites with senior leadership, usually followed by Mark pulling me aside afterward, telling me they were just checking in, nothing to worry about. But his reassurances felt thin, like worn-out fabric ready to tear. The tension in the office was palpable, though no one spoke of it openly. Colleagues who were usually friendly averted their gazes, their conversations hushed when I approached. The open floor plan, once a symbol of our collaborative spirit, now felt like an arena where everyone was watching, judging, or just trying not to be next. The official inciting incident, though I didn't know it then, happened a week ago. Mark called me into his office, closed the door, something he rarely did, and asked for everything. Every file, every document, every email related to my major project. He said it was for an audit, a standard review. His eyes were colder than I'd ever seen them, flat and unreadable. I handed it all over, a knot tightening in my stomach. It felt like giving away my armor just before walking into battle. My first attempts to adapt to this new, chilling atmosphere were awkward, naive. I tried working harder, staying later, hoping to prove my worth through sheer effort. I sent Mark cheerful, proactive emails, suggesting solutions to the project issues I suspected he was now pinning on me. I attempted to engage colleagues, but their responses were guarded, their smiles thin. I felt like I was walking through a minefield I couldn't see, each step potentially triggering an explosion I didn't understand. The air in the office grew thicker, harder to breathe. Every glance felt loaded. Every hushed conversation felt like it was about me. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. My mind raced constantly, replaying every interaction, searching for the mistake, the misstep, the moment I'd gone wrong. Was I paranoid? Or was the ground truly shifting beneath my feet? The challenges rose like a fever. The project I'd poured myself into was now explicitly being referred to in hushed tones as troubled. Mark started holding meetings about it that I wasn't invited to. When I asked, he'd brush it off. Just preliminary. Nothing you need to worry about right now, but I didn't need to worry. It was my work, my reputation. My name was on it. The whispers grew louder. Rumors started circulating. The project was failing because of incompetence, because of missed deadlines, because of poor management. My name wasn't mentioned directly in the open, but the context made it clear. It felt like being poisoned slowly, watching my reputation erode in real time, unable to defend myself because I wasn't even allowed in the room. My attempts to confront Mark directly were met with deflection, corporate platitudes, and a chilling lack of empathy. Just focus on your other tasks, he'd say, his voice flat. We'll handle this. Everything began to fall apart. My secondary projects, neglected while I scrambled to understand the sabotage of the main one, started slipping. The stress at work bled into my personal life. I was irritable, distracted. My family noticed. Friends noticed. I was losing sleep, losing weight, losing the buoyant optimism that usually defined me. The ground I thought was solid turned into quicksand. I felt trapped, watching my career, my stability, vanish before my eyes, orchestrated by a man I had trusted. It wasn't just the job anymore. It was the principle of it. The sheer injustice. The betrayal. The midpoint shift happened when I overheard a conversation. Just fragments, whispered near the printers late one night. Two colleagues, ones I hadn't expected, took all her data, presenting it as his own, blaming the delays on her, getting a promotion. The words hit me like physical blows. It wasn't incompetence. It wasn't a mistake I'd made. It was calculated. Mark wasn't just letting my project fail. He was actively sabotaging it, stealing my work and setting me up as the fall guy. He was going to take credit for the parts that were salvageable and blame me for the rest, clearing his path to a higher position. My stomach twisted. The naive hurt I'd felt vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp fury. This wasn't just about a job now. It was about integrity. It was about justice. It was about fighting back against someone who saw people as stepping stones to be used and discarded. The humiliation of being fired wasn't the worst thing. It was the realization that he was systematically erasing my contribution, trying to steal my history with the company. It was a theft of identity, a theft of worth. And he planned to do it right after firing me, when I had no platform, no voice, no power within those walls. He thought he was untouchable, that he could sacrifice me for his ambition and face no consequences. This realization changed everything. My strategy shifted from survival to retribution. I wasn't going to just walk away quietly. I wasn't going to find another job and pretend this hadn't happened. Mark had chosen to make this personal, deeply, irrevocably personal. And I was going to respond in kind. The thought brought a chilling clarity, a focus I hadn't had in weeks. But even with this new resolve, the deepening crisis was undeniable. The firing did happen. The walk out of the office was a blur of humiliation. Gathering my things from my desk, the few personal items that somehow felt insignificant yet heavy with the weight of memory, felt like a public execution. The pitying, or perhaps curious, glances felt like stones thrown at my back. I was a pariah, escorted out by a stony-faced HR rep, my access badges revoked, my digital life severed in an instant. Outside, the city felt alien, hostile. The job market seemed like an impossible mountain to climb with this stain on my record, orchestrated by a man who was now free to spin whatever narrative he wanted about my failure. All seemed lost. The cold reality of unemployment, of betrayed trust, of a damaged reputation, settled over me like a shroud. Every door felt closed. Every path forward seemed blocked. Mark hadn't just fired me. He'd tried to erase me. The turning point, the real shift in the tide, came after I'd spent a miserable few days wallowing in that despair. I was talking to my father, recounting the story through choked-back tears, the injustice burning like acid in my gut. I explained the overheard conversation, the suspicion that Mark wasn't just incompetent but malicious, that he'd stolen my work. My father listened patiently, his usual booming voice quiet, thoughtful. My family wasn't involved in my specific industry, not directly. They were elsewhere. Different sector, different scale. But they understood business. They understood power dynamics. And they understood loyalty, especially family loyalty. After I finished, he was silent for a long moment. Then he said very calmly, "Interesting timing. You know that parent company, the one that owns Mark's little empire?" I nodded, confused. Our company was a subsidiary of a much larger conglomerate, a faceless entity based across the country. Well, he continued, a hint of something I couldn't quite place in his voice, something that made the hairs on my arms stand up. Let's just say we've been making some investments. Diversifying. He paused again, letting the implication hang in the air. My heart started to beat faster. What was he saying? Diversifying into the parent company. As of this morning, he said, his voice now holding a note of steel, the controlling stake in parent company name is no longer held by the usual suspects. It belongs to us.
Us.
My family. The conglomerate. The faceless entity. The ultimate power structure above Mark, above his bosses, above everyone in that building. My family now owned it. The world didn't just tilt this time. It spun on its axis. The despair that had threatened to swallow me whole evaporated, replaced by a dizzying rush of adrenaline and something colder, harder. Mark hadn't just picked a fight with me. He'd unknowingly picked a fight with my entire lineage, a force he couldn't even comprehend. So, my father finished, his voice deceptively casual. What do you want to do about Mark? In that moment, the decision was made. It wasn't just about getting my job back, or even about exposing Mark internally. This was bigger. This was about delivering a reckoning. He had fired me publicly, humiliated me in front of the people I worked with, tried to destroy my career for his own gain. He thought he held all the cards. He thought I was powerless. He thought he was safe behind layers of corporate hierarchy. He was wrong. The plan formed quickly, sharp, and precise. My father's team moved with incredible speed and discretion. There was no need for a drawn-out corporate takeover drama. It was done. The ownership change was complete, signed, sealed, and waiting to be announced publicly on a specific timetable, a timetable we now controlled. My part was simple and exquisitely painful for Mark. I had to go back. Not sneak back, not beg, but return with the quiet confidence of someone who knew a secret that could shatter worlds. I called Mark's assistant. My voice was calm, measured, entirely devoid of the tremor it had held just days before. I requested a meeting with Mark. Just to collect a few more personal items, I said, some files I'd forgotten in my rush. I knew he'd agree. He'd want to see me, see the damage he'd inflicted, perhaps offer some faux sympathy while subtly reinforcing his narrative. He'd want to gloat. He'd want to witness the final extinguishing of the threat he perceived I posed. It was perfect. The day I went back felt surreal. The same building, the same lobby, the same security guard who now looked at me with a flicker of surprise. The elevator ride up was agonizingly slow, each floor a reminder of the climb I thought I'd been making, the fall I'd endured. My heart hammered against my ribs, but it wasn't fear this time. It was anticipation. Cold, sharp, focused anticipation. The office floor looked exactly the same, yet subtly different. Quieter. The air felt charged, expectant. People looked up as I walked in, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. Mark's assistant, Sarah, a kind woman who always seemed slightly harried, gave me a small, sad smile. She buzzed Mark, announced my arrival. He emerged from his office moments later, a picture of practiced executive composure. His suit was immaculate, his tie perfectly knotted. He wore that same tight, humorless expression from the conference room. He gestured towards the small, glass-walled meeting room near the entrance, away from the main workspace. He wanted this private. Good. But not private enough. The glass walls meant everyone could see. They just wouldn't be able to hear. Not yet. I walked past my old desk, a sterile, empty space now. A pang of something's sadness? Loss? Flickered, but I pushed it down.
Not now.
We sat opposite each other at a small table in the glass box. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Mark leaned back, crossing his arms, a smug, predatory glint in his eyes. He thought he had me. He thought this was just a cleanup operation, a final chance to twist the knife or ensure I wouldn't cause trouble. So, he began, his voice low, almost a purr, dripping with false sympathy. Needed to grab your things, huh? Tough break. Really surprised when I got the news. He was lying. Every line in his face screamed he was lying. He wasn't surprised. He orchestrated it. The sheer audacity of his performance was breathtaking. I looked at him, really looked at him. Saw the ambition in his eyes, the calculation in his smile. Saw the man who had willingly sacrificed someone he claimed to trust for a rung on the corporate ladder. The cold anger I'd felt since talking to my father solidified into something like ice in my veins. Mark, I said, my voice steady calm. I didn't bother with pleasantries. The time for that was long past. We both know why I was fired. His smile faltered slightly. Restructuring, he said smoothly. Difficult decisions. Your project, well, it wasn't meeting expectations. Senior leadership lost confidence. More lies. Presented as undeniable truth. He was doubling down, reinforcing the narrative he'd already spun. He was good.
I had to give him that.
My project, I countered, my voice still quiet, but with an edge now, just sharp enough to make him lean forward slightly, was meeting expectations until key resources were suddenly unavailable, crucial information was withheld, and the project lead was deliberately sidelined. I paused, letting the implication hang in the air. And we both know who orchestrated that. He flushed slightly, but held his ground. Those are serious accusations, he said, his voice losing some of its smoothness, becoming defensive. I don't appreciate this. You're no longer an employee here. You have no right to. Oh, I have every right, Mark. I interrupted, my voice still low, but carrying a new, resonant weight. I leaned forward slightly, meeting his gaze directly. His eyes narrowed, sensing the shift in my demeanor, but he couldn't possibly guess the scale of it. You thought you were clearing the decks. I continued, my words slow and deliberate, each one a stone dropping into a still pond, sending ripples outwards. The people outside the glass room were starting to glance over, sensing the tension. Getting rid of the person who knew too much, the person whose work you wanted to claim as your own. You thought you were safe, that you could just fire me and erase me. He opened his mouth to object, to bluster, but I didn't let him. What you didn't count on, I said, and I allowed myself a small, cold smile. The kind that doesn't reach the eyes. Is that while you were busy plotting my downfall within this little corner of the world? I paused, letting the words hang in the air. I glanced past him, through the glass, at the faces of my former colleagues. Some were openly staring now. The hum of the fluorescent lights felt louder again, or maybe it was just the blood rushing in my ears. I turned back to Mark. His face was starting to pale. The smugness was gone, replaced by a flicker of unease. He leaned back again, trying to regain control, but his posture seemed stiff, unnatural. My family was busy buying the entire building. The words landed not like stones, but like bombs. Mark froze. Literally froze. His eyes, wide with sudden, complete disbelief, were locked on mine. His mouth, which had been slightly open, clamped shut, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish out of water, gasping for air he couldn't find. Around us, through the glass walls, I saw the reactions ripple through the office. Heads snapped up. Conversations died mid-sentence. Faces went slack with shock. They couldn't hear me, but they could see Mark's face. And Mark's face, in that moment, was a perfect mirror reflecting the seismic shift that had just occurred. His carefully constructed composure had shattered into a million pieces. I continued, my voice still calm, still low, a predator circling its prey. My father's holding company completed the acquisition of the majority stake in parent company name this morning. Effective immediately, I echoed his own cruel words back at him, letting them twist in the air. You remember my father? The one you asked about my background? The one you clearly underestimated? He finally found his voice, but it was a choked gasp. That's impossible, he whispered, the color draining from his face completely. He looked genuinely sick. That's not how these things work. Oh, it is when you have the resources, I said, my smile widening just a fraction. And the motivation. You see, Mark, when you fire someone's child and try to ruin their name, some families take that personally. Especially when that family happens to own the company that owns your company. He started to sweat. Beads of perspiration broke out on his forehead. He fumbled for a glass of water, his hand trembling, and knocked it over. Water spread across the table between us, mirroring the rising tide of his panic. But the announcement, he stammered, his eyes darting wildly, looking for an escape route that didn't exist. The press release, it's not public yet. We control the timing of the announcement, Mark, I confirmed, my voice like ice. We decided this moment was appropriate. A little surprise for you. A little plot twist in your carefully planned narrative. His breath hitched. He tried to speak again, but only a strangled sound came out. He was choking on his own hubris. You fired me, Mark, I said, leaning back now, crossing my arms, mirroring his earlier, confident posture. But unlike him, my confidence was real. It was backed by undeniable power. In front of the whole office.
You humiliated me.
You tried to steal my work and destroy my reputation. You thought you were untouchable. I let that sink in. The silence in the glass room was deafening, punctuated only by Mark's ragged breathing and the distant, eerie hum of the lights. Now, I said, my voice hardening, losing any trace of calm. This was the moment. The precise, satisfying delivery of the final blow. You're going to clean out your office. You're going to collect your personal items. And you're going to walk out of this building. Effective immediately. His head snapped up, his eyes wide with a desperate, pleading look. You can't, he whimpered. You're just fired. You don't have the authority. I have the authority of the majority shareholder, Mark, I stated flatly. Which, as of today, is me. Or rather, my family. And our first official act is a complete restructuring of the executive leadership, starting with this subsidiary. Your position? Eliminated. Your access? Revoked. Your legacy here? Written by me. I stood up slowly. The people outside were no longer just looking. They were staring, leaning in, trying to decipher the silent drama unfolding before them. Some were probably trying to find news on their phones, searching for the acquisition announcement. It wouldn't be there yet. Not for a few more minutes. We timed this perfectly. Consider this my performance review for you, Mark, I said, standing over him. He remained seated, looking utterly broken, his carefully constructed world collapsing around him. You failed. You failed to manage your team ethically. You failed to uphold the values of integrity. And most importantly, you failed to recognize who you were truly dealing with. I didn't wait for a response. I walked towards the glass door, my steps steady and deliberate. As I reached the door, I paused and looked back at him, sitting alone at the table, the spilled water spreading, a puddle of his own making. "Oh, and Mark," I added, just loud enough for him to hear, my voice carrying the weight of absolute finality. "That promotion you were angling for? I think I'll take it." I walked out of the glass room. The silence in the main office area was absolute. Every single person was looking at me. Their faces were a mixture of shock, awe, and something akin to fear. I met their gazes squarely. I wasn't the humiliated victim anymore. I was something else. I walked to Mark's office, his nameplate still on the door. I pushed the door open. It was a large, corner office, filled with expensive furniture and framed awards. The window offered that same city view I'd loved from the 10th floor, only higher up. I walked to his desk, untouched, still bearing the remnants of his busy morning. It felt empty, powerless. I didn't stay long. There was nothing here I wanted. My vindication wasn't in taking his office, not really. It was in watching him crumble, in knowing I had delivered the justice he thought he'd escaped. I turned and walked back towards the exit. The silence followed me. No one spoke. No one moved. The air still felt charged, but now with a different kind of energy, one of stunned disbelief, of shifting power, of a story that had just flipped its script in the most dramatic way possible. Walking out of that building the second time felt nothing like the first. There was no shame, no fear, no crushing weight of despair. There was exhaustion, yes, and a strange kind of emptiness now that the confrontation was over. The burning anger had done its work and was receding, leaving behind a cold, clear space. The taste of victory was complex, sweet, certainly, but also tinged with the bitterness of betrayal and the recognition that some relationships, some trust, could never be rebuilt. I stepped out into the sunlight. It felt warmer than it had days ago. The city seemed less hostile, merely indifferent. I had walked in as a casualty and walked out as the architect of a new beginning. Not just for myself, but potentially for that whole company, that whole structure that had allowed Mark to thrive. My family's resources had given me the power to strike back, yes, but it was Mark's own actions, his greed and cruelty, that had created the opportunity for his downfall. He had handed me the weapon when he thought he was disarming me. The lessons learned were etched deep. Trust earned is precious. Trust given blindly can be fatal. Power isn't just about titles or positions. It's about leverage and knowing when and how to use it. And sometimes, the most powerful response to betrayal isn't just moving on, but turning the tables with precision and undeniable force. It wasn't about revenge, not entirely. It was about correcting an injustice. It was about proving that integrity, even when attacked, can ultimately prevail, sometimes in the most unexpected ways. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with the complexities of owning a major corporation, but for the first time in weeks, it felt like my road again, one I could build on my own terms. The taste of victory was still there, sharp and clean. If this story hit close to home, maybe you've faced your own moments of betrayal and unexpected turns. I'd love to hear your version. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. Thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these to life.